The views and opinions expressed in this podcast by the host and or the guest do not necessarily reflect the views of the host and or Paranormal Buzz Radio and or its sponsors. Use of any material produced by Paranormal Buzz Radio without express written consent is prohibited. Paranormal Buzz Radio will not be held responsible for you holding your knees, crying, and rocking in a corner in a puddle of your own urine, or being beheaded by a group of children in a cornfield. In fact, if you come across a group of children in a cornfield, we promise to make fun of you as you run away screaming in terror. Listener discretion is advised.
Hello everybody, and welcome to another episode of Demon Folklorist. I am, as you've probably guessed, the Demon Folklorist, Victoria J. Today we're going to be talking about Jinn in media, Jerusalem Syndrome, and possession. Belief in Jinn predates Islam. They're a very common occurrence in the Middle East, and it's said that they are made of smokeless fire, while angels are made out of light and humans made of clay. Now, Jinn predate humans, so that's something to just sort of keep in mind. They appear heavily in the Quran since they're accepted as a fact of life for people who have to occasionally deal with them. They're just sort of normal in Middle Eastern society. However, Jinn can be good, evil, or neutral. Demonic activity, according to Islam, is coming from the Jinn. So my research yields that they are actually a different type of entity because they behave differently than demons and are bound by different rules, but more on that later. First, we're going to talk about how Jinn are seen in media and how they've actually shifted from being Jinn to being genies. And they're not the same thing at all. I just want to be upfront with that. I'll yell at you. In 1992, Aladdin gave us the shape-shifting blue genie with his golden manacles, whose home is the lamp. This image really solidified the genie in popular media. At this point, Jinn genies, which is what I'm going to be calling them because it's sort of a mixture of the two of them, had been in movies for a very long time. Aladdin feels like a turning point in media where the full genie was born, when before they were just a mix of both types of lore. Sadly, the 2019 version took us back to the Jinn genie. It also became implied that genies could become human, and that they were once human, which further muddies the genie waters. And it, in effect, creates new folklore to enforce a happy ending. Now, I don't mind creative folklore-esque at all. So folklore-esque is when a story feels enough like folklore to be mistaken as real folklore. But this edition just really kind of pissed me off because it feels sloppy. Like they just were like, oh, let's just say this because nobody knows the difference anyway. I hate that sort of thing. Naturally, when you have a cultural reset like Aladdin, I love that movie so much. Oh my gosh. The Cave of Wonders is like its own movie and no one's gone there and someone's got to. Anyway, the lore of Jinn and genies also kind of got mixed up in horror movies, which is fair because if you really think about it, they are these beings that are stronger than humans and they can choose to be good or evil, so they could just easily choose to do evil to humans, right? And Wes Craven eventually got involved and ruined your ideas about the friendly blue guy who would grant your wishes. In Wes Craven's movie Wishmaster, this guy's quite ugly. He doesn't look human at all because guess what? He isn't. His wish granting is also really twisted in that nothing good ever happens when you wish from him. And this sort of feels a little bit more in line. It was more on the nose as far as lore goes, although he did sort of just like kind of do what he wanted to with it. In 2015, we got The Curse of Sleeping Beauty, which I'll be talking about in a lot more detail because I actually wrote a thing on it and then later realized that it fit better in this podcast. So buckle up, because this is how I write about horror in general. Thomas Kaiser has nightmares and is a shut-in. Now he's a shut-in with a creepy mansion inheritance from an uncle he did not know existed. He's dreamt about this sleeping princess his whole life, calling her Sleeping Beauty, but wakes up before kissing her every time until he's actually sleeping in that creepy mansion, Kaiser Gardens. So now he starts having dreams where she actually does wake up. She tells him she's downstairs in the basement and to not leave his land. He finds out the hard way that this is a death sentence for him to be away from his property for very long. He's assisted by Linda, whose brother has disappeared with his girlfriend in Kaiser Gardens, and Richard, a clergyman who helps with paranormal problems. They go downstairs to the basement, are met by many Jinn who try to stop them, but Thomas is able to slip past. He awakens Rose, which was a huge mistake. Colossal, actually. Also, did I mention her name was Briar Rose? Maybe not. She is actually evil and is going to bring about the end of the world to rain down around our ears. So way to go, guys. Thomas has demons in his blood. Okay. And Rose needs his demon blood because she travels via ghosts again. Okay. Because an ancestor of Thomas's really thought it was a good idea to sacrifice a virgin bride to Iblis or the Islamic Satan. Although he is a jinn in Islam, not a fallen angel as he's depicted in Christianity. Someone really didn't think about this one though, like when they were doing this ritual and cursed the entire bloodline, and now it's the end of the world. Like, way to go, dude. Why didn't you think that one through? Like, did you do it for riches? Because that's kind of a really lame excuse to curse everyone in your entire family and also possibly bring about the end of the world. But that's just me. There was also some conflicting imagery going on in the movie. Anubis, who is ancient Egyptian and not related to Islamic imagery whatsoever, was used in a dream sequence. These statues of Anubis seem to be guarding her. There is also mention of Erebus, who is Greek. And I'm like, you can't just combine ancient darkness gods and call it a day, guys. I get that they were going for a general underworld, but it irks me as a folklorist when that folklore that they're using is wrong. Also, no, Richard. Ghosts, demons, and Jinn are separate entities. Do not make me yell at you because you lumped them all together as the same thing. Anyway, so we've got this lone, broody male figure who thinks a girl will save him. Newsflash, women are their own people. And really, they're not there just to help you or to give you something. But this whole concept of the girl who's just there to brighten up the broody male's day and or life is called the Manic Pixie Dream Girl. And I love that this movie just sort of upends that whole thing, but like in a mystical way. Because she straight up murders him to pursue her own ends. And it really reminds me of Ex Machina in the way that Briar Rose just callously leaves to do her own thing, minus the man who helped her. Like, because we don't really need men to ruin the whole world, do we, ladies? We can do it on our own. The Sleeping Beauty Briar Rose's character imagery is very interesting too. She's covered in royal blue and spiky, feathered, bejeweled glass hanging from her crown. It's much more mystical than the average Sleeping Beauty. So here we have a fairy tale with sharp edges. I loved this because in horror, blue symbolizes tension, nighttime, anxiety, cold fear, unearthed monsters, demons, melancholy, danger, and tragedy, which sums up a lot of this movie. If you think about it, there aren't that many like naturally blue things in the world, like the sky, the ocean, and robin's eggs come to mind, but not much else. So horror utilizes this eerie otherness about the spirit realm for effect. Not only is blue considered supernatural here, but so is the idea of sleep paralysis in general. For many years, people thought that sleep paralysis was an exclusively supernatural situation, with the old hag, Mara nightmare experience. So this is where the old hag witch-like figure kneels on your chest or stops your breathing in some way, and you can't move. So it's interesting that this was explained in a way that reroutes sleep paralysis, which is widely considered to be your brain unable to process the sleep-wake cycle, producing hypnagogic hallucinations, which are weird, guys. I've had some where like a horde of spiders crawled up my wall. Ugh. Anyway, in this story, 13 Jinn were tasked to make sure that this curse is never lifted, because then the Kiamat, or the end of the world, would be brought forth, which happened anyway. The veiled demon seems to be the head demon here, a Jinnia, which is a female Jinn, and is the maker of vessels, who, when people get lost in the house and are murdered by Jinn, they get put inside these vessels and are commanded by her. So she's very morally gray here. Like, she's trying to prevent the end of the world, but she's also like totally killing people, so, She has a really terrible appearance, and she is actually mistaken for the villain, but that makes sense because she has bloody bandages covering her face and a crowned head, very reminiscent of Silent Hill. And she's also known as a shaitan, which are the most evil types of demons in Islam. She also has like really evil, icky demon hands. She makes gross sounds as she moves, and she has partially exposed flesh and bone. I would have also thought she was the real villain, but she is a villain, so I guess we'll accept it. Thomas is way cursed, and it sucks to be Thomas in these stories because, I mean, you're just not going to get out of this, are you? And he also knows it, which I'm sure also really sucks. It's very relatable what his reactions are to this type of supernatural interference in one's life. Uncle Clive could have totally been more transparent about his demon blood sickness. Really, Briar Rose sounds like she's actually a vessel for an evil force to possess and bring about the end of the world. Probably Iblis made some type of deal with the Jinn to make sure she actually wasn't released. So this sort of implies that there are good Jinn, since they aren't aligned with Iblis's designs for the end of the world. Probably because, like in Guardians of the Galaxy, they live here too. Maybe they don't want the world destroyed, you know? Overall, I think this is a really good movie, and you should definitely check it out. And parts of it are pretty accurate as far as Jinn go. Also, a random thing that I totally love about people when they are confronted with the supernatural, they use these concrete items to go fight paranormal entities like, yes, let's go fight the supernatural with a bat, a crowbar, and a gun. Nothing could go wrong here. People are funny. Let's talk about Jerusalem syndrome, and then we're going to have a little bit of story time as to why I personally have a connection to Jinn. Jerusalem syndrome is very interesting. It's when somebody visits a holy city and they become psychotic, seemingly for no reason. Like, normally these people don't seem to have a history of psychosis, but they do once they enter Jerusalem, which is scary. What tends to happen is people start to have these religious-themed obsessive ideas. They have delusions, and this whole phenomena has existed since at least the Middle Ages. It reemerged, at least to the public, in the 30s. Generally what happens is people have this very strange belief that you're actually a reincarnated character from the Bible. So this is something that's detected in several different faith backgrounds, and it seems like this person becomes cured after they're away from Jerusalem for a few weeks. But let's think about that for a second. What that means is that this could happen literally to anybody, just by visiting this holy city. That's terrifying. My question is, were these people psychics at all? Because unaware psychics can get easily pounced on without them fully being aware of what's happening. It's thought, though, that with this condition, that they had probably had mental health issues prior to coming to the city. But when it comes to mental illness, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that demons or spirits in general cause mental issues, because they don't. But the presence of an entity can make something much worse because it usually exists in some way before that. Similar behaviors have actually been observed at Mecca and Rome, which is fascinating. It makes me think that these places are energetically very strong, and maybe that's why they were built there, because of that energetic pull. But let's just entertain that Jerusalem syndrome could be caused by entities. And Israel probably has a bunch of jinn just running all over the place because this is the Middle East and it's right next door to other Middle Eastern cultures. So I do want to jump into jinn possession because it is very similar in nature to demonic possession, but with demons, everything is pushed up to 11 on a 10-point scale. Actually, if I'm being honest, it's more like 20 on a 10-point scale. Jinn possession is much more dialed back, and it can go on for much longer because it seems like demons have a real horrible effect on people just by being nearby for long periods of time. People report that their vitality disappears. Some people have even walked away from these experiences looking like they aged 20 years and it never went away, even when the demonic stuff did go away, right? Or continual illnesses that mysteriously started and have no real origin, stuff like that. So demons very clearly are very negative as a presence to us humans, but jinn just don't seem to be causing negative harm just by hanging out near us, I guess is my point. Now, story time. My grandmother and my aunt actually visited Egypt in the 80s. And you know, Egypt, it's in like the same general area. We think something might have attached itself to one or both of them at that time, and then trickled down into our psychic stuff now because we've had Jinn interference for years. There was one that was haunting me personally that has been banished. Thank you, Vanessa. And something stalks our family at large that isn't a demon for sure. Besides that it doesn't behave like the entity type I consider to be a demon that I've outlined in all of my work, demons tend to have different rules that they follow, like that the Christian Bible affects them quite heavily as if it's very painful to them. They are more compelled to listen when God and Jesus or the Holy Ghost are invoked, that sort of thing. Jinn do not follow these rules. They clearly have different rules. And that was like the main thing that made me go, okay, this is a different type of entity. Because otherwise, it would all be affecting them in the same way. I do want to talk about my experience with something I believe at this point might have been a Jinn. So when I was 15, I started to have the strange sensation of being touched at night. My arms, my legs, it was the very lightest of touch. But when we moved to Illinois at around 17, 18 for me, no, I had to be like actually 16. Never mind. I'm bad at math. I got a folklore degree for a reason. That was part of the English department. So it began to move my arms and legs once we moved to Illinois, feeling like a force without flesh and without warmth. It was just the force itself, and I knew I wasn't imagining it because it would frighten me. And it wasn't me. I could tell the difference, and I was scared to go to sleep. But being human, we tend to get used to things, even if those things are crazy and terrifying. And people who have lived in demonic situations will tell you that because they just do their best to go on with their daily lives. And Jinn absolutely do not have to listen if they do not want to. So I bring this up in the Annalise Michelle case, which I think was a Jinn, or if not a Jinn, then it definitely wasn't a demon. And you can read more about that particular case. I deconstruct the whole thing in American Paranormal Magazine. It's the November 2022 issue if you'd like to. But the main thing that made me reconsider how this case had been evaluated is that the entity in question would become bored during her many exorcisms. It wouldn't even come out when it was called to towards the end. Demons might have some raw power over us, but they are bound by rules. But what if maybe during an early visit at some point in her life to a holy place had something sinister in it and it attached itself to her? Because once again, Jinn don't abide by the same rules. So law of invitation, law of attraction, already inhabited and being sent by a dark practitioner, these things that we have noted in demonic cases are either not the same thing with Jinn or they need to be reevaluated. And eventually that'll be a different project for me, maybe my next book. Because yes, I am working on a book on demonic phenomena. I am interested in the experience of it. I'm interested in the way that we don't fully understand Jinn and what their rules are, at least not from a Western conception. I'm sure like Middle Eastern people completely understand the rules, but I'd like to bring the rules to everyone else because I feel like there's a lot of mistaking Jinn for demons because we didn't realize that Jinn were a thing over here. Now, back to Michelle's case, it would make sense that it didn't have the intensity of a demonic infestation because I don't think it was one. And that was another thing that made me go, okay, this doesn't feel like a demon. Why doesn't this feel like a demon? And it's like, well, the phenomena that was happening seemed very low level. So if it was a demon, it is like the lowest of the low. And I just don't believe that. But anyway, it would make sense that it didn't have the intensity of a demonic infestation, though she was clearly suffering from things outside of herself that other people experience. The way that I talk about this is that it was a group experience. And once it becomes like a group of people or even two people having the same experience, it's usually an experience and not a hallucination. So this wasn't all happening within Annalise. She was being tormented by things that other people were noticing. She also had no doorway that I could decipher that would let in a demonic presence. Once again, possibly it's because there wasn't one and a Jinn came in instead. Also, she was extremely devout and she knew very little about demons from her religious education because when I first got into this case, it was because I thought it was possible that she was suffering from religious-induced trauma, dissociative identity disorder. Because when I listened to her recordings online, if that is even her recordings. But let's just say for argument's sake that they were. I do not believe from those recordings that they were demonic. And this could be because I have psychic abilities, or it could be that I've just been doing this too long. And yes, I go online every now and then and I look for things that are what I call spine separating. The way that I can usually pick up on that it's a demon is when your spine very literally wants to separate you from that noise, from where it's emitting from. Like, because you're like, I've got to go. This is way too weird. Well, not even just weird, because like Jinn give me like a weird vibe. They're like, that's different. I don't like that. But when it's a demon, your spine's like, okay, we got to go now. And that's the difference. But I don't know if that's a difference other people pick up on, or if it's because I have psychic abilities. Who knows? But I do know that there's a different level of fear involved when it's a demon. Something to consider. I also identified in that article that Jinn and demons are distinctly different entities in behavior, motivations, and what binds them. Jinn are not always good or neutral to human, but for the most part, they kind of seem to be like one of the three, right? They're either good, they're either neutral, or they absolutely hate humans. And I guess what I'm wondering is, do these holy places attract the light and the dark energetically like ley lines? And ley lines are when energetic lines crossing the earth, and when they do actually cross each other, that it creates like a very energetically powerful place. So some other things about her case that I think are very interesting as far as explaining like why I didn't think they were demonic. She did have these horrible visions of evil looking faces and voices. She did also act like an animal. She'd tear off her clothes, eat spiders, eat coal, lick up her own urine, and she would bite the head off a bird and bark like a dog. Demons have been known to do things like this, sure. But Jinn do it as well, and Jinn are shapeshifters. So they can change into animals, and they often do when people meet them in the Middle East. She also hated religious-related items, and they'd be destroyed in her presence. This is a common sign of demonic possession because demons seem to be in pain when these things are brought out. There was also a terrible stench that emitted from her, which can be another sign of demonic infestation. Here's the problem. The way that this smell is described, it's unpleasant, but it is not to the intensity of a demon. Remember what I said? Like, it's like 20 on a 10-point scale. They will make it so that you rush outside and are vomiting because of the smell. This just seemed like it was kind of weird and they didn't like it. But this could be because the person who wrote this down, maybe they didn't ask that question, or maybe it was truly terrible and her family just didn't talk about it with that kind of intensity. It's hard to say. The other thing is that I think because Islam and Christianity have the same ancestry, because they are Abrahamic religions, it's possible there's some overlap. So maybe the reason that this thing hated religious items is because it translated to something in Islam, perhaps. Now, that's a bit of a stretch. I would have to do a lot more research to prove that, but it is possible just because of that common ancestry. She also heard knock, and her mothers and sisters could hear it as well, and this is a possible infestation phenomena. It normally comes in threes. She saw shadow creatures. Her mother watched her stare at the Virgin Mary with hatred, dilated eyes, and her hands contorted into claw shapes. And this, to me, proves that something supernatural was happening, because even if Michelle was having auditory hallucinations, her family wasn't. A shared hallucination, once again, generally points to a group experience. And she also described a dread that makes you think you are right there in the middle of hell. You are totally, utterly deserted. You can call all you want to for help, to the Mother of God maybe, but they are all deaf, and that's a direct quote from Annalise Michelle. This statement gives me pause because it aligns with the feeling of evil that's present in all demonic narratives, and perhaps it even indicates that this is a stage of oppression. But how did demons, who need a wide open door of invitation, even get into her life in the first place? It doesn't just happen. No matter what paranormal TV tells you, they are not waiting around every corner. They're not just waiting to pounce, waiting for their chance. They have to come in through a very clear, open doorway. And Jinn intrusions just seem to be a lot less bound by that wide open doorway rule. It seems like they can get in just by passing you on the street, which, again, terrifying because, like, you can't stop that from happening, you know? It was also reported that Michelle would begin speaking in a strangely deep voice, and she also had this supernatural strength of moving her body in that she would kneel and rise very unnaturally, very fast, faster than a human could. She couldn't bear to step into a church. She was unable to pray. She had screaming fits. Her stench penetrated everything. This does sound demonic, but it was reported to be a burning smell, and that does happen in demonic cases, but it's not the worst smell that a demon could imitate, and it just didn't seem to be powerful enough to be causing a reaction in other people, like making their eyes tear up or making them gag, making them retch, making them vomit, because that happens a lot in demonic narratives. So it's like there were things in this case that made me go, okay, that does sound like a demon, but why doesn't the rest of this? This entity clearly had supernatural knowledge of things that Annalise couldn't have possibly known, like people praying in their heads. She would scream when the priest would do this. She didn't like it when a crucifix would be in the priest's pocket because she knew it was there. And the entity seemed to understand other languages, which bottles of water had holy water in it versus not. And that also gave me pause because it's a big factor in determining the demonic, this ability to know things that the person could not. Jinn, in my understanding, are above humans. They seem to have abilities that transcend us. And they also are older than us. Maybe they picked up the languages because they were there when they were invented. I think it's hard sometimes to determine demonic cases when it comes to supernatural knowledge. And it is a little bit odd, though, that she had full recollection of her actions. Demonic possession almost always causes complete blackouts. She described it as she felt herself personally suppressed in what she called a hole. She helplessly watched while the other entities did things with her body and talked with her mouth. I have actually experienced this. This is incredibly accurate as far as what happened to me in my own possession. So I think it's a little odd that it lines up there, but this isn't like evidence. I would have to read hundreds of other cases where this exact same thing happened to make me go, okay, is this like a Jinn phenomena? I try to be as thorough as I can. This thing also hated invocations of certain figures like Archangel Michael, Virgin Mary, guardian angels. It would scream during the litany of the 5 sacred wounds, but they were only bothered by certain parts of the Bible, not others. It's possible it's because the entity was too stupid to figure out that, oh, this is talking about me, or it is because of that ancestry. Maybe similar things exist in Islam. And also something very strange is that the autopsy yielded that no organ failure was present, nor did her brain exhibit any damage that would cause seizures. The reason that she started going to doctors is because she started having very sudden seizures, very, very bad ones. At first they thought it was medical, what was happening. But her autopsy yields that there's no reason that should have been happening, at least not that we can see physically from her body, right? This case has been said to be textbook starvation, but she did not starve. Her organs did not fail, but somehow she died. And I personally think it is because the strain was too much of fighting this and she gave up. And that is not to say she is weak. I absolutely do not believe that. It can be too hard to keep fighting when you become spiritually depleted and when your body's being attacked. Because her body was attacked, it's just not why she died. Now, one other thing that I think you might find interesting is that Jinn possession symptoms, as they're listed online, are always thinking negatively. You develop a repulsion and a loathing for Allah and praying. And again, that crossover with Christianity and Islam. So maybe they do have the same reaction to God and Jesus. So it's possible, at least. There's also a dislike for reading or listening to the Quran. This could also possibly translate to the Christian Bible, though clearly Jinn are not bound by it. They may develop obscene and evil thoughts. The victim may feel extremely restless. They may feel panicked feelings and heavy-heartedness. The victim may always smell of urine or excreta. That is something that happened in her case. Another smell was the smell of feces. And depression, nightmares, heavy feelings in the arms and legs, hate for specific people, and hearing voices. this is just a small list because I have not started my Jinn research yet into all the different things that they have been said to do. I'm working on this other thing, but I do think that there is a strange amount of overlap in her case, and that reading as much demonic phenomena as I ever have, I just don't believe her case was demonic. I think it was something else that was mistaken for a demon, and she died. That's something also I want to reiterate. Jinn are not always good, and they are not always neutral. Shaitan is what an evil jinn is called, and they can be dangerous. They can kill you. So yeah, some stuff to think about. I find Jinn to be fascinating, and I, as a folklorist, I believe in almost everything, like as far as folklore goes, or at least, even if I don't believe in it, I'd like to believe it was real, or it was caused by something that made it seem real. Like, for instance, vampires. In Greece, I believe, there was a man who they kept staking him, and he kept being, like, basically thrown out of the earth, and it was because of a combination of the land itself throwing him back out, and then it was also, like, his body didn't look dead, and it was because there was, like, blood trapped in his upper body, or something like that. But I can see why that led you to think, oh my gosh, vampire, you know? Stuff like that. I love stuff like that, because it's like, yes, this is where it comes from. We know it now. But for all we know, vampires and werewolves are walking around. We don't know. As a folklorist, I'd like to believe a lot of this stuff is real. But I simply don't believe that this many people can have experiences with Jinn or other similar things like the Fae in Ireland, and that it not be real. Something is always happening. We just don't know what it is. But being that I also believe in spirits, all sorts of spirits, like, yeah, I believe Jinn are real. But anyway, enough of my ramblings. I hope you all have a demon-free day. And yeah, bye-bye.